Welcome back to France 24. We are live from Paris. The headlines this hour. The coronavirus situation continues to be worrying in France. More people in hospital with COVID-19 now than during the peak of the first wave back in April. Health experts in Italy call on the government to impose a nationwide lockdown. Hospitals in certain parts of the country are near breaking point due to the rise in COVID infections. And calls for the Prime Minister to resign continue to grow in Armenia. France 24 reporters on the ground meet people who recently left Nagorno-Karabakh before the ceasefire with Azerbaijan was clinched. We begin with the latest on the coronavirus pandemic in France. Prime Minister Jean Castex has said that the number of patients in hospital with COVID-19 is higher now than during the peak of the first wave. 1 in 4 people dying in France today have COVID-19. And while the R rate, that's the rate at which an infected person infects somebody else, is below 1, the lockdown in place won't be easing just yet.
Avec le président de la République, nous avons donc décidé ce matin de maintenir inchangées, au moins pour les 15 prochains jours, les règles du confinement. Je sais ce qu'est l'angoisse des commerçants qui n'aspirent qu'à pouvoir travailler et sont très inquiets de ne pouvoir rouvrir assez tôt avant les fêtes de fin d'année. Notre objectif est bien de pouvoir y parvenir.
Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Philippe Amouyel, Professor of Public Health at the Lille University Hospital, and I asked him if he's surprised the government didn't ramp up measures to limit the spread of COVID-19. Take a listen.
The number of cases that we observe in hospitalization and in ICU was already predicted. This is the fruit of the progression of the virus before the measure of curfew and lockdown. So this was expected. And what we expected is that the number would be at the highest, at the peak, around the mid of November. That's where we are now. But what is very also interesting is that, as you mentioned, the replication coefficient is below 1. That means that epidemic has reduced and the virus has reduced its progression in the population. So we are going in the right direction. We must be cautious, but I think these are pretty good news.
Pretty good news, because I was going to ask you about that R rate being below 1, because we still have the number of coronavirus infections in the past 24 hours is about 33,000. Still high, isn't it, considering the government wants to reach about 5,000 infections a day?
Yeah, but this is a good target, because if we want to develop new measures just to exit the lockdown, we need to have not too many cases running all over the populations. And this will allow other techniques to maintain and to crash the progression, just like, for instance, mass screening for the populations, for instance, could eliminate all the asymptomatic cases. We could follow up the virus in the wastewater, for example, just like they've done in Marseille, where they anticipated a little bit but did nothing, of course, unfortunately, the increase of the progression of the virus. So this low level will allow probably to a partial exit from the lockdown, perhaps to have not too bad Christmas time. And finally, I hope if we put all that in place, reduce the chance to have a third wave after Christmas.
Because that is something, government officials need to bear in mind, this that there could potentially be another wave of the virus, because we did have the first wave. During the first wave, everyone was talking about the second wave, and then the second wave came, and it seems that everyone was ill-prepared for it.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't have to be prepared for it. We just need that this third wave do not exist. We have the tools, we have the means. Now we need strong decisions, clear decisions, and prepare this now. The exit of the lockdown need to be prepared now because it will be complex, it will be long, but it's a question of survival for the physician at the hospital, because I'm not sure that they will be able to support a third wave.
Dr. Amuyel, we had some sort of good news this week on Monday when Pfizer announced that its vaccine candidate has an effectiveness rate of 90%. How optimistic should we be, considering that countries that have handled the pandemic really well, like South Korea, are not jumping on this vaccine?
If you want exactly my viewpoint, I need to read the results in a scientific publication. This is just an announcement. We didn't see any publication. We didn't see any results. And you should know that there are still 10 vaccines which are actually ongoing for phase 3 clinical trials. So just perhaps wait until the results are published, that we'll be able to estimate exactly the possibility of this new vaccine.
Okay, so you're not convinced just yet, because from what I read about the vaccine, it needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees Celsius. This is complicated because even pharmacies in France don't have fridges that go that low. So that would mean hospitals would need to dish out the vaccine.
Yeah, but this is different. This is the new type of vaccine, which are based on what we call RNA, needs this low temperature to be stored. But this also is real for other type of vaccine which are actually under trial. What we need now is results. Is this immunity enough? Does it last enough long? Are the undesirable effect very low, and so on? We need this information before having a definite opinion on this. I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I'm just cautious.
Okay, you're being cautious. Very briefly, Doctor, you know, we are in a lockdown. We know that there are 33,000 new COVID-19 infections in place. Given that a lot of people are still flouting the rules now versus during the first wave of during the first lockdown, do you think that we can actually reach the 5,000 level of infections, which the government wants to reach, the target it's set?
Yes, because I advocate for this type of confinement. It's different from the first wave. Now we have masks. Now we have hydroalcoholic gels. We didn't have that at the first wave. So the national confinement need to be very strict. Now it's different. We can maintain a little bit of economy of children back to school, and then have an efficient confinement. And we will need to wait the next weeks just to be sure that this is very effective.
Now, the coronavirus pandemic has taken its toll on students in France. Those who couldn't find employment during the summer months are now relying on food banks to eat. Maria Sofos reports.
The queues are getting longer and longer at this food bank on the University of Bordeaux campus. Students come here once a week to collect free food parcels. They're all scholarship holders who've been left out of pocket by the COVID-19 pandemic. The health crisis meant that essential summer jobs were few and far between for these students.
Normally I work on a seasonal basis. This summer I couldn't find a job, and that's going to affect my income for the rest of the year.
I looked for restaurant work, but obviously that's not possible. I pay €545 for my rent. Each month I'm living on €100 less than usual.
It's become essential for me. It really helps me to feed myself and to do so healthily.
The food parcels contain healthy produce to help give the students a well-balanced diet.
There are turnips, carrots, bananas, kiwis, as well as tinned goods. We really feel like we're providing a good service. The demand is growing. There's a real need for it.
Since March, 13,700 students have benefited from this service. But food banks like this in the region won't be able to provide for much longer without a subsidy from local authorities. Stocks are starting to run low.
The aim is for the free food parcels to go to the students who really need them the most. You've also got to take into account that we're providing food to some 19,000 other people in the Gironde region.
Social services at the University of Bordeaux have compiled a list of the students most in need. Restaurants on campus are also offering €1 meals to students, compared to the €3.30 they would normally cost.
To Italy next, where over 37,000 COVID-19 infections have been reported in the past 24 hours. Health experts are calling on the government to impose a nationwide lockdown. Hospitals in certain parts of the country are near breaking point. The crisis in the south is particularly out of control. In the city of Naples, a man suspected of having the coronavirus was found dead in a hospital lavatory as he was waiting for a test.
Patients waiting in ambulances queuing outside this hospital near Naples amidst a surge of COVID-19 cases in the city. Doctors are warning that hospitals here and elsewhere in Italy, particularly in the south, are being overwhelmed as authorities battle to tackle a second wave of the virus. A nationwide overnight curfew is in place and tighter restrictions involving the closure of bars and restaurants were introduced in Tuscany and 4 other regions on Wednesday. It's a tough time for local businesses.
We have huge expenses, so with just a takeaway service, it's going to be difficult to recoup our costs.
We are closing with so little certainty about what's going to happen after the next 2 weeks, so it's hard to be optimistic about the future. We're afraid the situation is getting worse.
Health experts, including the National Federation of Medical Associations, say tougher restrictions are needed. The number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Italy has risen above 1 million and more than 42,000 people have died. 623 virus-related deaths were recorded on Wednesday, the highest number since early April. Admissions to intensive care units are now doubling every 10 days. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte is trying to avoid a repeat of the economically punishing national lockdown imposed earlier this year when Italy became the first European country to be hit by the virus. But many now feel that another national lockdown is inevitable. The government is understood to be meeting scientific and health experts on Thursday to examine whether additional measures are needed. A decision is expected over the weekend.
Hundreds of people took to the streets of the Armenian capital for the third day, demanding the resignation of the Prime Minister. Anger is palpable in the country after a ceasefire was signed with Azerbaijan to bring an end to 6 weeks of fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. It came with territorial losses for Armenia and resulted in thousands of people displaced.
Villages, homes, their loved ones. The losses for Nagorno-Karabakh's refugees are all but immeasurable.
Կարիքները երևի սնունդ, հիգիենա եւ նաեւ շորերի կարիք ունեն, չէ՞, ինքնանոց տեղյակ եմ, քանի որ շատերը թողել են վերջի վարքյան.
Around 100,000 Armenian civilians fled what they called the Turks as Azerbaijani troops advanced.
Մենք տուն չունենք արդեն, երկու տունն էլ վառել են քրդերը։ Շուշուում էլ քարին թակում են։
As far as the war's human cost goes, it's still too early to tell.
4000 զոհանենք, 4000 կորած անհայտ։ Բայց միջև այդ ասալմովիրիա է, մեր 2000 զոհա, միջև մենք օվիրիա դնորը։ 4000 զոհ։ Մենք ահագին զոհեր ունենք։ Հələ թե ինչքան անհայտ կորած, ինչքան заложник. Заложник убивает, սպանում։ Заложники սպանում, թողում չընկնա։
Allah had 4 children at the front line. Of 2 of them, she knows nothing.
Сейчас для меня самое главное, чтобы найти моих детей. А потом уже жизнь покажет, как будем жить, как будет продолжаться наша жизнь.
Allah left with her daughter while she could, while her husband and their other children remained in Karabakh. Like many others, she found Armenians across the border waiting with open arms.
Մենք ամսի 3-ից իրանք մեր տան են մնում 9 հոգի։ Քնելու տեղերը հարմար չի, թե չէ, ամեն ինչ ոչինչ, այտենց ես ինչ ճոխերով չի, բայց դե ապրում են, միասին ապրում են, ինչ անենք, իրանց փոխարեն մենք ենք։ Ոնց պիտի լիներ, որ մեր չընդունի։ Հա? Ինչ պիտի լիներ։
The fate of Allah's sons is ever in mind, as is that of their hometown, Shushi, now under Azerbaijani control.
Так лицо к лицу жить с азербайджанцами, наверное, это невозможно. Это не будет, конечно. Но будем надеяться, может быть, в Степанакерте сможем.
After 6 weeks, the war in Nagorno-Karabakh drew to a close before Armenian forces lost control of Stepanakert, the de facto capital of a breakaway republic. whose ultimate fate remains unknown.